Howdy tubers, welcome back to the Zach Life. So this episode is going to be about working on the truck engine, but before we get on to the truck engine, I want to show you what I've been working on today. So I don't know if you remember way back when, I ran an extra PEX line from up here back there to the water tank. And I've got a solenoid installed. This is what I've been working on. This between that PEX line, that return line, and the hot water line. I'm going to put a switch up here. I hadn't got that done yet, but I got a cord. So how this will work is you'll walk up and hit the button just for a second, and it will circulate all the water that's in the hot water line back to the tank. So you have instant hot water at the sink, at the shower, and the sink in the bathroom. So back to the 1693, back to what this video is supposed to be about. The engine that's in this thing, the truck engine, is in really poor shape. It's got a lot of blow-by, and it doesn't have very good oil pressure. I need to give a little bit of background to this thing. So the guy I bought this from, I bought it off eBay, sight unseen, from Los Angeles, and hired a guy to drive it back here. And the guy I bought it from said, "Oh, the engine runs great. You know, don't worry about it." Well, anyway, the guy that drove it home for me got about 30 miles away from my house, and he calls me to run out of diesel, of all things. Anyway, I'd already paid him to drive it and the fuel and everything. I had to go take him some fuel. I put the fuel in it. He crawls in the truck, rolls the window down with a can of ether and starts spraying ether in the air cleaner as he's cranking it. I'm like, hang on, dude. Let's bleed the air off this thing and, do it right. Don't ether it to death. And anyway, he's like, well, the guy I bought it, the guy I picked it up from, the guy you bought it from, and I went and got out there and got it. He pulled the top off the air cleaner and just soaked that thing with ether, cranked it up with ether, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he said knocked and clattered and smoked and, started though. He goes, anyway, he spent the night somewhere, and he's like, when I started it the next morning, I had to ether to get it to start. And anyway, so I attributed the fact it had a lot of blow-by to it might have been ethered to death. It had a broke ring or something in it. But of course, the low oil pressure, that's an indication often of high amount of bearing clearance. The rod and main bearings are wore. And I imagine that's probably what the deal is. But the reason that I'm going to take this thing apart is one symptom and one cause maybe. When you start this thing up cold, it builds a lot of oil pressure. It'll wrap the gauge out to over 100 pounds. And the only thing that can cause that is either someone has taken the oil pressure regulator that's on the oil pump and stacked a bunch of washers or something behind the spring to try to get the oil pressure up, thinking that would help a low oil pressure symptom, which it won't. Or it's stuck. And that's what I'm thinking is a possibility, that the oil pressure relief valve in the pump is actually stuck, or on the pump. It's two different deals in these. That the oil pressure relief valve may be stuck. And if it's stuck partially open, that would cause very high oil pressure when it's cold, and it would cause low oil pressure when it's hot. And if that's the case, and the engine's in good shape, and it's just got a broke ring, well, I can just keep driving it and not worry about, the motor coming apart, which is, I'm concerned. I'm concerned if it's, if the rod and main bearings are wore smooth out, that it may start knocking and kick a rod out of it or somewhere on a vacation. And anyway, that's what I want to do. I want to take the oil pan off this thing. I want to pull the oil pressure relief valve out and make sure that it's not stuck, and make sure I don't have a problem with it, and then see, what else is to be seen. Probably pull a bearing down or something, pull a rod cap down and take a look at it and see what's going on. So like I said, it's kind of sprinkling. I plan on doing this in the morning. If it rains too much, I might do this in the dirt, so I don't want to be in the mud. This is Wednesday. I may have to wait till Friday. All right, I'm gonna cold start this thing. I'm gonna give you kind of an idea of what the oil pressure is doing. Well, it's 70 degrees. I guess I'm gonna have to go plug it. So it just wraps the gauge plumb out. Hopefully we blow something up there. here's the magnet that come out of there. It looks really good. There isn't much on it. I'm not going to bore you with pulling the bolts out. I want to get all the bolts stripped out of this thing and see if I can get the oil pan out of here. All right, so I've got all the bolts out of it except that one right there, and there's one adjacent to it. I'm going to get up in here with a screwdriver and see if we can get this gasket to pop loose. Oh, looky there. Nothing to that. All right, so this here is obviously the oil pump. This is the gear that drives it. This would be the suction, or the pickup tube. This chunk of cast iron here, this housing, is actually the oil pressure relief valve. When oil pressure gets too high in this rail here, it's got a plunger that moves back, compresses a spring, and it dumps the oil back into the pan right over there. Anyway, this is pretty straightforward. It's got several tangs. I'm gonna have to get a screwdriver, but there's just 4 bolts, and this chunk here will come out.
So I start realizing here the spring is pushing this away from the pump, and I begin to realize that what I thought was wrong, the plunger being stuck, is definitely not the issue.
So here's what we've got here. It actually had this lock washer dropped in the bottom to use as a spacer, and then it had this spacer as well. This is a homemade, looks like a piece of 1/2-inch pipe. These are supposed to have a spacer. They've got something in the bottom that looks sort of like this, but it's about a third as thick as this. It's basically just sort of like a washer. But anyway, the spring goes in there, and then this plunger goes on top of it, and the oil pressure acts against this piston. Whenever you get enough oil pressure to push this piston down past, I don't know if you can see in there, there's a hole. There's a hole down in there, and through that hole passes the oil. I guess there's actually one on both sides. It passes the oil back through each side here and through that tube back into the pan. This is obviously not my problem as far as low oil pressure, and this was somebody's, attempt to raise oil pressure. I think I'm gonna pull the oil pan, the oil pump off of it, and look the pump over and make sure it's not grenading. All right, so right here is the oil pump. So I've got, this is a spring that came out of it. It's got significant wear. I don't know how well you can see right there. It's got a flat spot in the spring. I'm scared of this because if this breaks, you're screwed. I've got another U-spring here that looks a lot better. It's actually a little bit taller, not very much, but a little bit. The parts book calls for 2 different spring numbers and 2 different spacers. It's got one spring that's got a little bitty spacer and one spring that's got a spacer that's about this thick. This is obviously homemade. I'm just going to leave this lock washer out and put this spacer in. Drop the spring. I've got all this cleaned up pretty well, and the plunger, where'd the plunger go? Right here. So I have got, it looks like this has had a gasket on it, and my parts book shows a gasket that goes here. The service manual does not, and so at least some of these had a gasket. This one, as I took it apart, did not have a gasket. And what I'm going to do is take a very small amount of silicone and make a little silicone put very little bit of silicone around this thing. That should make it seal. I don't suspect that was actually any problem with this, but nonetheless, we're going to put just a little bit on it. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I've got this little plate I've made to bolt over. This is the output of the oil pump, and I'm going to put a pressure gauge in this so we can do 2 things. We can check the opening pressure of the relief valve, and we can see what shape the pump's in without actually having to take it apart. See if it's about grenaded or if it's still pretty tight, and we can also check and see if we've got any major leaks anywhere. I don't know where they could be, but just for the sake of pressure testing it, we can see if we've got any other problems with the pump. And like I say, we can see what this pressure is before having to actually put it back in a truck. So I think we're probably okay. This pump's leaking a little bit, but you can see the number of revolution I had to turn it, to keep 60 psi was only like maybe several revolutions per minute. I did get this bypass to open. It looked like it was probably about 80 psi, which is probably right about where I want to be. I'm sure the actual pressure read on the engine will be less after it pushes it through the oil cooler and the oil filter and everything else. So it may be 80 or 90 pounds at the pump, make 60 at the oil rail when it's cold. But anyway, the next thing is I'm going to go out there and pull a rod cap and a main cap down, just to take a look at them and see what they look like, and see if I can get a date. I'd like to know maybe when it was overhauled. All right, let's see if we can get this number 6 rod cap off. I don't know if this thing will do it or not. Like a champ. See if we can push the piston up just a little. Pop the bearing out of it. Actually, I'll just push that thing up. Just look at it without popping the bearing out of it. Oh shoot, that sucker looks brand new. What the heck? You see up in there, you might not get a good view out of it. That thing looks really nice. Alright, so I got some plastic gauge, and plastic gauges, if you don't know what it is, I don't have time to explain it. You can look it up. Anyway, I put a piece of 3/1000 plastic gauge in this bearing, or 5/1000 I guess actually. And anyway, this looks extremely good. This is like 2/1000 or so clearance. I would have expected this to be like 10/1000 clearance. Isn't that right? Yeah, 2/1000.
So if an engine has got low oil pressure and it's got a good oil pump, the only logical place that you could be losing that oil is through the bearings, through high bearing clearance. And when I say I expected to see a 10/1000 clearance in that thing, that's not actually what I expected to see. That's what I would expect to see from an engine that had low oil pressure because of its bearings. I'm confused because now I have no idea why this thing doesn't have good oil pressure. It makes no sense to me.
Since my torque wrench doesn't go high enough, I'm just going to finish it with an impact wrench. Looks good to me. Golly, that's amazing. It's got just a little shine on this side, but that bearing does not have many miles on it. I would guess less than 50,000. I'm going to go ahead and plastic gauge that. Make sure that they don't have a 20 under crank with 10,000 bearings or something stupid. 3,500. That's what it calls for, is 3.5 to 6, and that's about 3 3/4. Oh geez.
you're not familiar with the bottom end of these big engines, a lot of times they'll have a torque spec plus a certain number of degrees. This supposedly gives you a more accurate clamping force. And so the rods were 50 foot-pounds plus 120 degrees. The mains are 75 foot-pounds plus 180 degrees. And that's how I'm able to finish these with an impact wrench. They are actually torqued to spec with an impact wrench.
Alright, I'm going to see if I can clean this thing up a little bit. Maybe take the pressure washer and get the old gasket off. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Hope y'all can see some of that. I hate to go change clothes in the middle of a motor overhaul, but greasy as I am, that's what I'm fixing to do. I can't stand being wet. All right, so this is pretty clean. It came out good enough. I went ahead and put the oil pump on before I went in and changed clothes. You know, it was full of oil. It dripped all over me. It's pretty nasty. Anyway, I got the oil pump put in, and the ends crimped on. I'm going to put this gasket together. I know a lot of people's probably going to be harassing me like, I can't believe you took that motor apart in the dirt out there and got it full of dirt. And I know, you're right, I'm not going to argue that you're not. But I've done this quite a few times, quite a bit in the oil field, you know, on those rigs and stuff where you just don't have a choice. And you've got to remember too, I didn't overhaul this thing. I just took it apart and looked at it. If I had overhauled it, I would have probably tried to get it out and in the shop or something. But that wasn't where we were at. It wasn't what I got to do. And my plan of attack on this, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to video this because the camera is going to be kind of in the way. But I'm going to put this gasket on the oil pan, put it together, put silicone on it, get it ready to go. And I'm going to go out there with a roll of paper towels. I don't know if I videoed it or not, but I had the truck running. Yeah, I did. I showed you the oil pressure. I started the truck right before I started this, and I did that on purpose because it slings oil up and oils all the walls of the block and everything else. And when this thing is set outside in the dust and stuff, the dust all sticks to the oil. And of course, as it set a few hours, that oil's ran down, and any dust that's collected in the oil is dripped out of it. Anyway, my plan of attack is I'm gonna get the oil pan ready to go. Then I'm gonna go out there and take a roll of paper towels. That's usually what I do, and take paper towels and wipe everywhere I can reach inside that block and get all the oil out with white paper towels. You can see real well, and any dirt that's got up in that engine will come out with the oil and the paper towels. At that point, the things that this is going to get beat around on, it might get dirt knocked off in it, like particularly on that engine, the battery cables and the drag link, power drag link, hoses and stuff. I'm going to get saran wrap, just like you buy at Walmart or whatever for your food, and saran wrap that so it's clean. And so hopefully I can get this in there and up against the block and not knock any dirt off in it. Anyway, I'm not going to video that because I'm more worried about getting this thing together clean than I am getting to see you put me a few bolts in the oil pan. But that's the game of attack. That's what I'm hoping to get done. So I'm going to start putting this thing together. I am not putting a ton of silicone on this thing. If you do, it'll squirt the gasket out, but I am putting a little bit. These old motors leaked, and it's been apart a few times, and you get on this with a gasket scraper and it's got some gouges in it. And then the other thing is that when this is going to come back apart, because it's going to probably come back apart and needs overhauled, it'll be much easier to get this gasket back off if it's had a little bit of silicone put on it. All right, so I got it buttoned up. The sky's getting kind of blue. I'm afraid it's going to rain. Let's go dump some oil in it, and I want to light it tonight so I can finish this video up. This is actually Friday night. Yeah, Friday night. This thing's kind of a pain to put oil in. It takes it slow. It's got this long fill tube that goes around the flufflator, or exhaust pipe. Alright, that's 9. Surely that's enough to start it. I guess it holds much more than that. That's 12. That ought to be good enough. Looks better. That's got the I think that pressure is probably opening about 85 pounds or something. Let's warm this thing up.
So did y'all catch that? It just dawned on me what's wrong with this engine. Let's watch it again. I'll talk about it in a minute.
Let's warm this thing up. So I've been sitting in here jacking with this. This is looking a lot better. I got the oil temperature up to 200, which is higher than I've ever seen it going down the road. It's usually about 170 or something. And I'm still idling at about, what is that, 18 pounds or something? But what's different, it used to idle down here about between those two marks, about 12, maybe 15. But what's so different is that when I bring it up just to like 1,000, 1,200, it's up nearly to 40 pounds. And used to, at about 2,000, it would only run about 50. Which is not, it's honestly not that much different, but the oil temperature is still pretty hot. That used to be about as high as you could get it with it around the plumb out. I'm going to give this about 10 minutes, let it kind of cool the oil off and stabilize everything and see what it looks like.
All right, so I'm trying to get this video finished. It's 2:42 in the morning. And it dawned on me, one of the problems, what's going on with this engine, and I'd like to document it because if somebody else searches for this video, 1693 oil pressure problems, it might help them out. So we have significantly improved the low oil pressure, especially at idle, in this engine. And I think that was probably a leak between the oil pressure relief valve and the oil pump itself. The oil pressure has went from about 15 pounds to about, I will say 12 to 15 to about 18 to 20, something like that. It's come up about 5 pounds. This is significant. 20 psi idle is plenty good enough as far as I'm concerned. You know, that's not an uncommon number in a 3406 or whatever, you know, any other Caterpillars. But the difference in how this thing acted in, say, a 3406 is when you would bring it up to 12 or 1400 RPMs, even if you're lugging it down the road, it would have 50 or 60 pounds of oil pressure. And this engine would not. It would not get above 40 pounds driving down the road unless it was wound completely out. It might get up to 50. Now this is fixing to get hard to follow when I realize this, but this engine's got a brake saver. It's got Caterpillar's sort of, what am I trying to say, shot a Jake brake. It was what Cat used instead of compression brakes back in the old days. And the circuit that oil flows, so the brake saver is basically a big inefficient centrifugal hydraulic pump, and it's designed to be inefficient. So how the oil circuit works in this is it's got obviously the oil pump. The oil pump pumps to a thing called a priority valve, and the priority valve, the oil comes out of it. It goes through the oil cooler, through the oil filter, back to the block. Now, when the oil pressure in the engine gets above 40 pounds, the priority valve opens and it allows that excess oil to go to the brake saver. Now, when you engage the brake saver's got this spool valve, and all these lines go through it, and it changes the routing of how the oil travels through all this stuff. So it takes the oil cooler out of the circuit of the lubrication. So now you're going oil pump, priority valve, oil filter directly back into the block to lubricate the engine. And then the extra oil that comes from the priority valve, the oil that's not required to get 40 psi in the block, goes to the brake saver. It charges the brake saver. The brake saver is now an inefficient hydraulic pump, and it pumps oil through the oil cooler and back to itself. And the engine oil is just used basically to get it topped off and to keep it charged. Now, this is why when you'll notice when I pull the brake saver in, the oil pressure drops from 60 or 70 or whatever to 40 for just a few seconds, and then it comes back up to where it was. Now, when you kick the brake saver out, it's that spool valve moves. It puts the oil cooler back in circuit with the lubrication circuit, and then it's got a port that opens in the brake saver itself pumps all the oil out of itself back through a port back into the block. It empties itself. Now, when you engage the brake saver has got several, they're not seals, they're brass sealing rings that are designed to leak, if you would. There is always some oil is required to replenish what's being leaked through the brake saver. So theoretically, when you engage the brake saver, you should have a small drop in oil pressure. Perhaps not one that's measurable. I'm not exactly sure what it would be, but it shouldn't ever go up, is what I'm getting at. In that clip, let's watch it. In that clip, when I engage the brake saver, the oil pressure actually goes from 85 pounds to 100. It increases significantly after the brake saver is engaged. Now, this can only mean one thing, that spool valve on the brake saver is leaking oil from the high side of the priority valve through it somehow, through whatever, back to the discharge port that it controls. And the whole valve is one chunk. It does got about 6 lines that comes in it. Now, all of a sudden this makes sense to me. That's why that engine has got 15 or 18 pounds of oil pressure hot idling, but it won't build above about 35 or 40 pounds going down the road. And that's because all the oil that's being generated above 30 or 40 pounds in the priority valve is getting sent to the brake saver spool valve and dumped into the engine, back into the block. And so that priority valve is acting like a pressure regulator in a way. Now, we notice this because I was pulling the brake saver in to put a load on the engine, but you don't ever run the brake saver going down the road, obviously, for obvious reasons. And it's, there's no hills around here. I've never used it to decelerate down a hill with the engine speed up. And anyway, that's what's causing the low oil pressure at high engine speed. Now, you notice when I had the brake saver pulled in, 12 or 1400 RPMs, the thing had 60 pounds of oil pressure. I wound it out, it went to 70. And that's as good as it gets. The oil pump looks good. The oil pressure regulator is set right. It's got good rod and main bearings. That thing should have 70 pounds running down the road. And like I say, I'm sitting here at 3 in the morning, and it just dawned on me what the problem is. It's that stupid brake saver. Anyway, I'm not worried about it now. 40 pounds of oil pressure to me is not a problem. What's a problem? What I was worried about was high bearing clearance, or that the oil pump was fixing a grenade, or that it's fixing to have a rod start knocking to kick a rod out the block, or the spring was about to break and the oil pressure regulator. To me as a mechanic, I saw several scenarios that would cause low oil pressure in this engine, and they're all things that could have been detrimental if I'd tried to use it. Anyway, I no longer have those fears. I think that it'll be all right. I'll probably pull that brake saver off at some point. You got to figure too, this engine has got a lot of blow by. It's very possible that it just had a set of bearings rolled in it, that it wasn't overhauled. And I would like to overhaul the engine if I, get away with a brake saver valve until, maybe next winter we'll pull the engine out of it, do a complete out of frame. I'd like to seal it up, make it clean as a whistle, and not have to, I mean, it's a cool deal. You open the hood, I want a Snow White cat in the hood, without a drop of oil on it. Anyway, I know this video's been very long. I hope y'all enjoyed it. I hope for someone it had some good information in it. I am fixing to put this in iMovie, and I'm done editing, and I'm gonna hit the render button, and I'm going to bed. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.